Bien, buenos días nuevamente a los
Okay,
que
good
se están
morning.
integrando. Vamos a comenzar con la
Good
sesión de
morning.
la
We're going to
revolución del
start with the
almacenamiento,
session, the
para lo
revolution
cual
storage.
vamos a
And
partir con
for
unas
that,
palabras de
we're
nuestro
going
keynote
to start with a
speaker, el
few
ministro de
words
Energía de
from our
Chile,
keynote
señor Diego
speaker,
Pardo.
Mr. Diego Pardo.
Buen día, ¿cómo están? Vamos a ver
Morning.
qué se
Morning,
trata
how
la
are you?
presentación. Ahí está. Bueno, gracias por acompañarnos hoy.
Thank you for joining us today.
Parto por
And I'll
felicitar
start
a
by
Olave
congratulating
por
Olave
este libro
for
blanco del almacenamiento de energía.
for
Estamos transmitiendo hace un
this
rato
framework of
sobre
storage,
lo difícil
energy
de la
storage.
publicación, porque cada
You
vez
know,
que
we're
se le
talking about how
preguntaban
hard it
sobre
is
los
to
datos de
publish because every
almacenamiento
time
iba cambiando.
we're asked about the
Este ha
information
sido
on storage, you know,
un
things
año
are changing
especial
the scenario.
en
Start
términos de
changing. So this has
almacenamiento. A mí
been
me ha
quite
tocado ir
interesting in terms of storage.
4 o 5
I've had
inauguraciones y
to
siempre es la más grande.
work in 4 or 5 inaugurations. It's always the biggest.
Y cada vez que
And every
revisamos los
time
datos van cambiando
we
porque
look at data, you
efectivamente
know,
la
things start
penetración de esta
changing because the
tecnología
penetration of this
está
technology
ocurriendo a una
is
velocidad que yo creo que
happening
no
at
habíamos
a
visto
speed
nunca
that we have never seen
en nuestro
before.
país. Hablaba
In our
con Marcos
country, you
Mancilla, que
know,
entiendo que
with Marco
nuestro
Mencia, we were talking
secretario ejecutivo de la Comisión Nacional de Energía, que va a participar en
and
el
we,
panel.
you know, we have seen others joining our
Simplemente
panel.
miramos las declaraciones
And,
en la
you know, I
introducción,
was talking to the executive for the
no solamente
National Energy
estamos
Commission, and he's going to
anticipando
participate in the panel as
la
well. But, you
meta
know, we
del
were looking
2025,
at
la que
how we are
tenemos,
not only
no
anticipating the goal
solo
for
estamos anticipando
2026,
la meta del
and it's
2030
not only
y la meta
that,
que
it's
venía
also
después.
the goal from 2030
Un
and the
poquito
one after that. So,
marco conceptual.
the conceptual
Parte de
framework, part of
lo que se refleja
part
en
of what is being reflected
nuestra
on
en la rápida penetración de
on
la
the
tecnología
fast
de almacenamiento,
penetration
y
of
una parte de
technology
esto
for
tiene que ver
storage.
con
A part of
el
it
precio
has
de
to
la
do
tecnología.
with the
Ojalá
price
tengo
of
control para eso.
technology. That is something
El
that we
precio de
have
la
been
tecnología
discussing. The price of technology
ha bajado de manera abrupta, incluso más
has
de lo que se pensaba,
dropped
y eso ha
very
sido porque obviamente
abruptly,
un factor
and that
que
has to do
explica
with a factor that
el
explains
rápido despliegue de esta
the
tecnología. Pero eso es
fast
solo una pieza
deployment of this
del puzzle, y
technology.
obviamente la
That is
pieza que
only
no
one
controlamos.
part.
¿Cuál es la pieza que
And of
controlamos
course,
y que
it's,
como país
you
nos
know,
ha
what is the
permitido
piece that we do control? Because there's
facilitar
others that we don't control. And what has enabled
revolución que vamos a
this
caracterizar en un
revolution
momento es la idea de
that we're
construir
going to
políticas de
characterize in a
Estado
minute, it's
en
the
materia
idea
de
of
energía.
building
Yo en mi
some
intervención del día
state
de hoy decía que
policies.
nuestro país tiene
And
esta
yesterday I was talking
extraordinaria
about how our country
capacidad
has this extraordinary
de criticar.
capacity for
Somos gente muy
criticizing.
crítica.
You know,
Siempre
we
y
are very
criticamos desde
critical
hace nuestro
people. You know,
tiempo y
we
también somos
criticize what others
autocríticos
do, but we're also
con lo que
self-critical
nosotros hacemos.
with what we do.
Pero es precisamente esa
But
capacidad
it's
de
that
criticar, de
capacity
discutir,
for
de disputar,
criticizing,
lo que hace que
for
nuestros
you
procesos
know,
de toma de
discussing,
decisiones sean
and
robustos.
that makes
Una vez que
our
este país toma
decision-making
una decisión
process to be
sobre
quite
qué es
robust.
lo que
So
tiene que
once the
hacer en una
country
materia,
decides on what they're going to
técnicamente es
do
una
on a
decisión
matter,
que se sostiene
that's
en el tiempo,
usually a
porque
decision that is
representa
sustained over time because that
la
represents the
síntesis real
synthesis, the real synthesis
después de disputas de
after
la
disputes
heterogeneidad que tienen todas
of the
las sociedades
heterogeneity in every
en el mundo moderno. Y
society
esto
in the
se refleja de manera muy clara
modern
en
world, and that
2015,
is
que tuvieron
reflected
nuestra
very
primera
clearly
política
in
energética
2015. We
nacional,
had the first
que se
national
actualiza
energy
en
policy that is
2022.
updated in 2022,
Las políticas
and
energéticas, lo
the
vamos a ver
energy
en un primer
policies we'll be
momento,
looking at that,
se materializan sobre todo
but they
en
are
la idea de
materialized especially under
facilitar
the idea of
un primer
enabling
tiempo de la transición
a
energética y
first time of
la
energy transition,
penetración inicial de las tecnologías
or the
renovables. Esto
initial
se complementa con
tolerance
una
of
agenda
technology and renewable energy. So that
inicial
is
del
complemented
segundo
with
tiempo y
an
una
initial
transición
agenda
cuyo
during the
hito
second
más
time of
claro
energy
y
transition.
perceptible hoy en día
And
es
the biggest
precisamente la simplificación
milestone
regulatoria
is
en
the
materia de almacenamiento,
simplification
que es
in
lo que
regulations and matters of storage.
que
And
es lo que nos tiene
that
discutiendo estos
is
números el día de
what
hoy.
we have been discussing today. And finally, the plan of decarbonization, which is something we'll present tomorrow and during the week. And that takes, in a way, the testimony of the agenda. And this is very focused on the storage, in the short-term storage. And we want to figure out how we're going to solve the issue with long-term storage and modernizing their network, the grid. And when we talk about energy transition in our country, particularly in the electric sector, it's always good to start with this graph, which shows the horizontal axis, and we look at it's a timeline. And the vertical axis, there's basically the amount of energy. And the color represents the different technologies that are available. And so this timeline, what it shows is several things. First, the amount of colors that we have towards the end of the graph. The line you have there in 2025, that shows the differences between the projection and what is historical. And the amount of colors that we have from 2015, it's much bigger. And that is the first time of the energy transition. And as I was saying yesterday in my intervention, energy transition is essentially a change in the technology of production. And so what we do is we change the way we produce energy. Initially, we used to do that with a hydrothermal energy. And as of 2015, we started incorporating new types of technology, each time more and more. So first photovoltaics, solar, wind power, geothermal energy, storage, and of course SNSP, which is a way of storage. And this is a graph that is growing. And the curve is growing as we move over time, and so that shows that this is a country that is demanding more electricity in its systems. And we see electromobility, and we have more electricity. And as you can see there, the darkest colors, diesel, natural gas, it's growing. And so this is the decarbonization. So the technologies are for the use of hydrocarbons and replacement on technologies that are associated to the use of renewable energy, such as wind, and also the heat of the soil. And another point that I'd like to focus on is that the area below the curve that corresponds to coal is the darkest, and it's similar to the size of the storage. And so that visual coincidence is, that is actually not a coincidence, but the withdrawal of the thermal centrals, it's not relatively simple. We are about in the middle of retiring some coal centrals, and they were very old units. The prices were not very competitive, and they were not great for the grid. And as we are moving along with removing some of the newer centrals, which is where we're now, we not only need to start substituting the base energy, but also other properties within our electric grid. And for that, the short-term and long-term storage is important. So it's no coincidence that the growth of storage is similar to, it's kind of a mirror of the removal of the coal centrals. And so we can see that even in some specific projects where physically, where thermoelectric centrals were, now they are used by batteries. which is something that we'll see even today. One is in Tocopilla, and then maybe John will share a little bit about that too.
Otra manera de caracterizar
Another way of characterizing this technological change and the increase in the type of technology that is available, especially when it comes to the penetration of technologies, we can see that here on the right chart, on this slide, where you can see that the penetration of the photovoltaic, solar, and also wind power has been about 1% of the grid to 35%. And the grid for 2010 is smaller than 2024. And so we are adding more in that proportion. And in that sense, it's not enough or expressive enough of the size of the jump if we consider that the size of the cake in 2024 is bigger than 2010. Let's remember that the amount of total years below the curve is growing as we are closer to 2030. And so if you look at that, the thermal technologies, they have all dropped. But the one that has dropped the most is coal. So to the left, we see what's happening in matters of storage. Our planning, our strategic planning, our long-term planning that I was mentioning earlier, so these goals that we are setting as different governments and what is guiding our public policies, we said that we needed to have 2 gigabytes of capacity for storage by 2030 and 6 gigabytes by 2050. And in January, we'll have over 2 gigabytes working. That is what you see in gray and in blue. That will end up by January. That will mean that in operation we'll have over 2 gigabytes. And so, as I was saying earlier, this is a bit behind due to the speed. Speed of the market, but I understand Marcos is going to share a bit about that. But if we consider that under construction now are the amount of batteries that we'll have under construction by January next year, that will go over the goal in 2050. So we'll have about 8 gigabytes declared in construction. What is declared in construction? You know, Chile is a very special country, so everything is declared, so it's not something that you make up, and it's an administration work. So where you present at the National Energy Commission a series of information that are relative to financing and also the purchase orders of the equipment. So it's not just a figure in a PowerPoint or an ad, for a shareholder meeting. It's something very concrete, and it's equipment that have a purchase order. And so in simple terms, by January, we'll have the operation. Under operation, our goal by 2030, and purchase order, our goal of 2050. So that is what we're discussing. So our goal of 2030, we will meet that 5 years ahead, and surely we'll even meet the goal of 2050 before 2027 is over. And so that is the speed that we're getting the penetration of the technology. And so what does it mean in terms of our process of decarbonization, and also what happens with the functioning of the market? In the beginning, I was saying that the energy transition is essentially a technological change, a change in the way we produce energy. So in this case, electricity. Therefore, this technological change has an effect, a very important effect, and the production, it changes our productivity. So what I'm going to share with you now is that we could look into the future.
Este es un gráfico que tiene en la,
This is a graph
en la línea
that you
horizontal
can see in the
las horas del
horizontal
día.
line,
Y en la línea vertical,
and in the vertical line, the marginal cost.
la línea vertical de la derecha
So
tiene
the vertical
la
line
inyección de almacenamiento. ¿Sí?
has the injection of
Entonces,
storage.
aquí tenemos
And
dos
so
subestaciones. Estos
here,
son datos hipotéticos.
what we see is not
Estos
hypothetical.
son datos reales de cómo está
These are
funcionando
real,
nuestro mercado
this is real
mayorista
information
de
on how
precios
our
modales. Chile tiene un sistema de precios modales,
wholesale
donde el mercado
market is
mayorista
working, what are
se
our
refleja en cada zona
local
por
prices,
precios
and Chile has its own system of prices. So that is what this is reflecting. And we have in 2023, by half of this graph, in 2025, this year, half towards the right. In 2023, we had no storage. In 2025, we already had the injection of storage, especially in the non-solar hours, the hours where there's no sun. So this is what's happening in the storage systems, and they are taking energy and they are returning energy in the areas where there's no sun. So what's the effect here? In the wholesale market, here we have two effects that are important to consider, both of them. Because when I had to take over this type of leadership, an important issue is that generators for renewable energy, which are used in photovoltaic technology, they said, half of the time, I have 8 hours of production. So if there's a photovoltaic system for 8 hours, half of that I get paid zero in the wholesale market. And in the other half, I get paid what's there for $3 per megawatt. And if I have a contract where the other 16 hours I need to go out and buy, and to serve my own contract, I need to buy at $200. And so half of the time where I'm producing, I make zero, my income zero, and the other 16 hours of the day I need to go out and buy at 200. So it's really difficult to finance this type of project. So this was definitely an obstacle for energy transition, because in a wholesale market, that was really difficult to actually do what we have always done in our country, which is generating conditions so that the private is moving, the private sector is, the private investment is moving, and so under these conditions that was really difficult. So this is why the penetration of storage technology was so important, because if you look here in the yellow line, we see the substation Crucero Antofagasta in the middle of the Atacama Desert, so at the heart of the solar hub that our country has, which is closest to the central south area here, towards the north. And so if you look here, the Crucero substation in the yellow line, we have hours of the day where there's zero income. So the track of income was stabilized during the day at a price that is not zero. But what's even more important, the price in non-solar hours dropped about $100 per megawatt. And so that means there's people that know a lot more than me in this room, but funding this type of project with a picture from 2023 is hard, and the funding a project with the picture or the image from 2025 is relatively simple. So we went from having an obstacle in terms of transition in our plans for a neutral carbon, now we have an ally. And so this is a huge impact in the way the market works, and decreasing about $100, and we need to stabilize the income going from zero, and that is a game changer for anyone that wants to develop projects. And this is why we are looking at the revolution that we're looking at. So this technology, what allows is this type of change that enables adding new technology, and for the country that's great news. Because if we take into account that the solar hour is 16 hours a day and the non-solar hours are 8, we can see the average of energy in other cases has dropped in about $100. So that means that the variable cost of practically every activity, the real cost, because there's contractual costs and long-term costs, but in a way there is a channel of causation that is more difficult to explain. But the market costs of electricity in substations on average is about $100. So that is a productivity jump. So when we think about how to make a country more productive, what we want to do is to produce more with less. And generating technologies that allow to do more with less, so that takes an increase in productivity, in salary, improving the exchange conditions. So all of that positive cycle of the economy, that is what's produced when you have a productive jump such as these ones. Once again, this is just a picture of what's starting today and something that comes through a relatively simple path. So what are we doing and what is the secret? And we see long-term goals, and we were able to make the most out of the opportunity, and of course using the public and private sector. And what we did, we just simplified the implementation of this technology. We're simplifying the payments per hour, which was a regulation that was in about in a decade, enabling access to fiscal land, especially in the north of the country. Most are fiscal land, is fiscal land, so we need a special regime to access this area, and also simplifying the environmental authorizations. So in simplifying the penetration of a modular technology with low impact in the environment, we provide testimony in the private sector, and the private sector responded in an analogous way, same way as 2015, 2010, and replacing the technology and providing an expectation on not only a wholesale market working better, but also this is about $8,000 million of investment that we are moving, and it's going to change people's lives and having better conditions, better income, and of course improving the condition of every space of the economy that depend on energy and electricity. So I'd like to end by inviting other countries to reflect on how this can happen in other parts of Latin America. So this is something that is the scope of any country, at the reach of any country. And of course, we have the Atacama Desert that has the biggest solar radiation and the longest amount of hours of sun. But we have similar places and a pragmatic strategy that is focused on regulation and working closely with the private sector. That could be a huge difference. So our electric systems work, and also our economy can work. So with that, I'll leave you now. And I understand that we'll open a panel so that we're going to see a little bit more about what's happening in our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And now to continue, we are going to get Miardo Cadena, who is a technical advisor for the Latin American Assembly for the Energy, who is going to present the publication of the energy. So good morning, Aaron. Thank you very much for your presence here, and thank you for this amazing message that you gave us. And I would like to start with one of the last expressions of the minister. How important is this experience that Chile has lived in its process of development of the renewable energies and the storage of those energies, and how they have adopted it to their reality. So this is what has also created that we start working on this topic as organization, how the storage of the energy is becoming a very important driver for these elements. And it's also important that we as an organization focus on the treatment of this topic. I don't know if I can control this presentation, but to present this white paper. Okay, thank you very much. So, first of all, the idea is to write a technical paper. We wrote it, we disseminated, but then we started getting more and more important information about what technology, storage technologies meant, the challenges that countries had to face, and all of those, all that development and that had to be faced in this conversation with the Executive Secretary Andrés Rebolledo and all the other teams, so that we can write this white paper about the storage. And this is the document that I would like to present to you today, and we have it here available for all of you. So this paper has several objectives. First of all, to disseminate what is the state of the art of the development of the storage. And I could talk about all these 7 objectives that you can see here, but the most important one is to provide the supplies that we can have the supply for the planners, for the builders, etc., so they can continue based on knowledge and development of these new technologies. And here, if you look at all the topics that we have addressed in this publication, and we can go through them very quickly because we have a panel that I think who has a lot to share with us. So just a quick overview of different technologies that we have that are not exclusive among themselves. So we can have the batteries with the lithium, then we can have different elements. So they are the highest level development, but we cannot forget other technological alternatives such as the joint pumping and other long-term storage, and also different solution that could have a short-term solution but help with the systems. And here is the problem that Minister Farda was talking about. We did an overview to see what is the installed capacity, and Chile was a bit of a headache for me, because every time I would have an image, I would have to go and review the information because it would be changing all the time. But this is the most updated information we have here that says that approximately in the whole region the storage has this capacity 2.7 kilowatts, and the 1.7 is a gas system, and we have 1 gigawatt in the pumping storage, which is mostly stored in Argentina in the Rio Grande complex. Now, I'm sure that some of these numbers have already changed. We just wanted to see how it was going on, but there are some developments in other countries. And this is a very interesting point, which is future projections. And here we are making progress, and countries as Chile are making very quick progress. And how can we project ourselves through 2030, 2035? And we started with the basic information, and that is that there was a resolution that said we are going to multiply the capacity of the renewable energy installation, and the International Organization for the Energy, in order to multiply these renewable energies by 3, we need to multiply by 6 the installed storage capacity, so that we can use these different technologies, so that we can reach the emissions. So I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but they also consider utilities, they also consider storage behind the measurement and the pumping. So if we consider the whole absolute value, it means that every 100 units of the renewable energy, we have to include 18 units or 18% of the storage capacity. So the question is, in which measure that this global information of 18% of storage is really realistic for our regions, because we could see that Latin America and Caribbean has a lot of differences compared to the global standards. So we have to see what are our abilities, and based on OLADE from last August, we have about 70% of the renewables, which is quite over the global average, which is 30%. And another element that is very important, how the hydro is represented in those 70%, and it's 50%. And hydro energy is also considered a source of storage. So we can't take this data and say the global level is 18, so in Chile and Latin America we also have to have only 18. That's not true. So this development of the energy, we did certain projections and adjustments, and we got these numbers that are considered optimistic. Some others are considered pessimistic. And these numbers say that by 2030 we are going to have 24 gigawatts in installed possibility of storage, and in 2035 it could reach 46. So you know the projections are moving very quickly nowadays. But next year, probably, if we are talking about this issue, we could get different results. So, well, let's see what are the essential aspects that we have identified, so that we can have these storage systems and develop them. You can see all that on the screen, but there are 3 elements. First of all, the definition of the storage as is. We have a lot of loopholes in many countries that in their regulation they don't have a clear definition of what is storage. All of us have some idea, but we don't have a clear description, and that also affects what is the role of this storage in different markets. And we have to see also the tariffs. How are we going to know the investment in the storage based on what? In the storage services, as it's mentioned, or its participation in the auxiliary services, or in a frequency, or how are there like installed capacity? How are we going to evaluate that? So that's a very important issue. Another essential issue is planning, because I participated in a panel in which there were important regional companies, and all of them talked about the planning, importance of planning, that for one point it was completely marginalized, but we have to plan that, and also technological development and evolution of the markets themselves, because they say that we need to plan. So the national planning that is going to tell us what are the realistic expectations of those So we have to consider also the resources that are available. So here we can also, what are the barriers? There are many of them, but the first one is regulation, or the ability to build different elements and to be able to have the adequate perception of the risks that exist in these type of businesses, because there are new businesses that can be adopted to certain levels that we know, but based on its characteristics, they need also to incorporate additional elements, and that's very important. And finally, we also have to identify certain study cases. Each one of them, for different reasons, were included here. Chilean case is out of discussion because it's a leader in the storage. We already heard all the numbers from the ministry. It has 1.1 gigawatt. By the end of the year, it's going to be 2 gigawatts of the storage ability, and they have 21 projects in different elements of the execution, which are going to reach for 3.2 gigawatts. So it's an impressive number. So in Chile, this is a model that is very well known, and hopefully they could be assimilated by other countries according to their skills. Then we have Brazil. Brazil always is an important point to discuss. They incorporated the storage within their planning, but what is actually calling our attention, what caught our attention, is that they have installed the capacity over 220 gigawatt. So according to their planification, they only need 800 megawatts of the storage. So when I saw these numbers, it really caught my attention, because there is not clear relation between what they need and what they're planning, but we have to consider what is the installed capacity and how they can create this complementation between different energy sources. So maybe Brazil doesn't need so much storage because they don't have it already in all their hydro reserves. And then in Mexico, we don't have a very big development of the infrastructure, but what they've done is they did the reforms in their network code, and they suggest that all the projects of renewable energy should also have installed capacity of at least 30% of storage. And we have Argentina and Honduras. Why am I considering these? Because these countries had a very successful bidding process. They had for 500 megawatt for Buenos Aires, and they have already got over 600, and with the possibility to get 200 more. And Honduras is the first Central American country to create this bidding for 75 megawatt, but it was so successful that they're now in a development process to get more. So to sum up, these aspects that are essential to consider when we are developing the storage of the technology, different technologies for this. And with this, I'm going to finish, because after that we have the most important part of the meeting, which is the panel with our very important panelists. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Eduardo. And now we are going to continue with the panel. I'm going to invite our panelist, Michel Abreu, who is the Vice President of the Renewable Energy Boost Driving. And then we have Marco Mancia, who is the Executive Secretary of the National Commission of the Energy, and Joan Leal, who is the EDF Power Solution Managing Director. So now, please, I leave you with the panelists.
Bueno.
Okay, so.
Para mí es un honor.
For me, it's an honor to be in this panel with these very well-known representatives of this sector. I don't know, where should we start? Joan, maybe you should start. I would like to. He is the CEO of EDF Power Solution in the region. And what are the projects that EDF has in the region? What are the needs of the speeding, accelerating implementation of this progress? So welcome. So thank you very much, Medardo, for the introduction. This is a very interesting panel revolutionizing the storage. And lots of your presentation and Energy Minister's presentation explained a lot, but I would like to say what the EDF Power Solution Groups is doing in Chile. But before that, I would like to mention that EDF is a French electricity company which is 100% state-owned, and it has a great project for the growth in the energetic sector with the objective to help the energetic transition countries where we operate. This has a great presence in over 130 gigawatt of the installed capacity, and we have over 94% of the energy that is being produced by the EDF group is decarbonized energy, and a great part of that we achieved with the storage, global storage system that is 7 gigawatts that is being distributed between different hydraulic pumping centers and the batteries around the world. And in this scenario, the countries where we are making the most progress with the batteries is United States, South Africa, and Chile in South America has become an important element for the development of the batteries. In Chile, we have very important participation. We've been in Chile for over 11 years, and we have already built 1,400 megawatts of installed capacity between wind, solar, and thermal energy, which helps us to provide flexibility and safety of the system, and that's one of the objectives of EDF for Chile. And of course, we are part of the revolution of the energy storage, and we are in the middle of the stage of the financial closure and starting the instructions of, as Mr. said, these numbers change, but we're going to have one of the biggest parks of the storage elements, which is going to be near the Crucero, with the installed capacity over 500 megawatts of the storage, which is going to store for 4 hours energy. We also have one in the area of Maria Elena with 500 megawatt installed, and this battery is going to help dispatch this energy to the electric system, and a large part of that energy is going to be sent to our regulated client, but a bigger volume is also going to be sent to the mining sector, which is also considering energetic transition in their area, so that they are going to provide energy to the state-owned company Codelco, so that they can contribute to the transition by the 2030, that 100% of their energy comes from the renewable energy and from the storage. So it's one of our most important sectors, and from CND we have also received, and DC, we have received this energy. So we are going to continue with this, and this is the commitment of the EDF group with the energy transition in Chile. But as the minister said, we want to continue implementing storage with different energies. Right now, short term, we have portfolio of several projects in development for over 1 gigawatt in batteries that are going to be implemented in different areas of Chile. Thank you very very much. That's very interesting to know. And these are one of the main actors here. And now we are going to move to different area, to Caribbean, as it's an island, it has a different reality, and our countries in Latin America have different needs. And we have a presence of Michelle, who is the Vice President of the Association of the Boosting of the Renewable Energy in the Dominican Republic. And we can see there are very interesting points there. The development is in its beginnings, but how we can see this association and what are the challenges of this storage system.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for allowing the Caribbean to be represented in the region. And first, let me tell you about the association that drives renewable energy. We represent the renewable energies in the Dominican Republic, where we have stakeholders that are at a large scale and also at a distributed generation. That is the main focus, and of course, we have consultants and manufacturers, etc. And so, as a country, we're quite small, with 11 million inhabitants, with an installed capacity of about 5,800 megawatts that in use, we have about 4,300, so we have a bit of context of the size, where, well, we have been making a lot of progress with renewables, and we see that there's several cycles of investment in the Dominican Republic, where that first round or cycle was in 2010, when renewable systems were being installed, with some challenges in financing, sovereign warranty, investing with several restrictions. And then there was a second step in the last 10 years where we have PPA contracts from the government, and we reached a reasonable price. That was always the bottleneck for the installation and for the growth for renewables. And the last, the third cycle, where we see that it's about it was about 24 FPAs, and well, back 4 years, and back then we didn't have any batteries, and we were waiting for them. The electric grid was still growing, and the last 20 years, from having renewables, from having renewables, it was about 50%. And so, for most, we see that that was about 5% for solar, biomass. It was just one project. So, at that point, after we went over all of these challenges of contracting and also looking at prices, looking at the clarity of regulation, we see the batteries. And we see how this makes it more necessary to keep the system. So historically, we've never had any issues, and now we do have some. So now the challenge is not even about not having regulation, because our regulators have been quite practical. So for such a small country, in terms of growth, there's about 4 regulations that are valid, and 4 more that touch on on batteries. But now, as you've all seen in your participation, is the clarity in the remuneration. So if when responding to your question, the regulation challenge is seeing how we are going to pay the regulation frequency, etc., same as the arbitrage, and to support the renewables, the long-term renewables, without any clarity, and about 600 megawatts are renewable, which, from then we'll see naturally a drop or a change in the price in the market. Thank you. It's really interesting to see what's happening over there. And since you were talking about regulation, we're talking about what the regulator, the guilty one here, the one in charge of what's good and what's bad, right? That accelerated process and that success case in Chile, well, we assume there's a regulation framework there. So what would be the risk? What are the essential factors that are creating this level of development? Thank you, Gerardo. And thank you, Laura, for the invitation. And as Leonardo was saying, CNE, the National Commission of Energy that I represent, is the regulation in the energy sector in Chile. And well, since the boss left, I'll be happy to correct the figures, because we've had this in several forums. He shares the keynote presentation, and then I need to correct the figures. It's good. This is good. As Melardo said, in Chile, storage has truly been a revolution, a technology revolution in the regulation market. We have now 1,736 megawatts operating. And declared in construction, as the minister said, is a formal administration process. Adding that, we're reaching 7,500 or so megawatts with an average of 4.5 for something hours of generation. And if we add the technical team, they are working, because every week we are declaring what's under construction. So our projection is about 8,606 megawatts of storage by 2027. And so, for those that come from other countries, it seems huge, but even for Chile, 1,600 megawatts, if all of the batteries were simultaneously ejecting energy, we could supply about 75% of the national demand, just with batteries, with storage. So that's the level of the deployment of technology. And looking at the question, what's the biggest influence? The minister clearly showed how some public-private initiatives are leading to this. So when it comes to our job as regulators, I will highlight the electromobility and the storage bill, where storage has been going around, and recognizing at a legal level, especially the standalone storage with regulated characteristics. Those are regulated by the law. They can participate in the market, and that opens the door for private, where they have the investment initiative, where there's less risk. They can develop their own projects. But as many of you know, it's not just about having the bill. We need to look at the full detail, because that's where we see what's on the Excel or the most modern instrument. The SU for project assessment evaluation. So how much do we pay for storage? And in Chile, for energy, it's quite easy. It's looking at the difference, between 0 and 200 in 2023. That was the gap that we could consider, but of course it's necessary to pay according to power. And what we see now, what's from 2024, I think in Chile we are all We all think that that was the regulation trigger because that showed what was the capacity in that technology for 10 years and then permanently. And so with that, project started being deployed, and currently they're still under review and under public consultation. The regulation and the coordination of the operation, and also the small scale, which needs to be incorporated, and we need to look at the storage treatment. And something that is exclusively for CNE, which is something more technical, is this is what our colleague was mentioning, the auxiliary services, complementary services. So that's another driver that we can see in the technology, and was not very clear. Then CNE this year issued a regulation document that clarifies how we treat complementary services, frequency, the storage, and how will that be remunerated. And this is one under public consultation. And so in 2 more months, that's the deadline for the extension period. That should already start working, so that will allow those batteries to have another payment component, and especially the system, especially clients, they will be able to drop payment on complementary services are usually done by thermal machines. And with this technology that we have there and this level of deployment, it would be absurd not to use it for complementary services or auxiliary services. So I think this is a mix of the things that we have done so far. And this is what I can share so that you can see in other countries how you can adapt that, because of course each country has their own regulation. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Marcos. Realmente tu intervención.
Thank you, Marcos. Your intervention, well, the way you started, that really shows a concern on every time that we talk about storage, we need to update figures. You know, you've given more information. I'm sure we'll have to adjust that information for next year. So now we'll go to Felipe. And this is somewhat different from one of the biggest developments of technology. You know, we have Huawei, which is more impressive in the region. You are specialists in the network code. You know, how you look at the region. And you know, Chile's situation is quite particular. So how do you see the region? What the challenges? What are there enough conditions for the development of this type of technology in the region? So what are you looking at? You know, whether there's favorable environment or not? What can you share about that? And thank you for the invitation. Well, when it comes to what happens in the region, you know, as the figures that Leonardo said, and you know, when we consider Latin America, South America, it's about 1.7 megawatts. So we gigawatts. So there are projections, yearly projections reaching 23 gigawatts by 2030. So countries that are leading storage are, you know, UNLOC and Chile, Brazil, Mexico. And Chile, in terms of, you know, they have been operating with about 1 gigabyte of storage, and the figures that Marcos corrected. New construction, under construction is over 7 now. So regulation today, Chile is at the forefront, and it's recognized as the storage capacity and payment on complementary services. And in the case of Brazil, for example, there is a roadmap for considering the growth in the projections by 2030. Mexico has a strong potential for storage, but they're also facing some regulation obstacles for the operation, but they are being considered in the Mexico market. So while the region has a basis, to operate, we still have a long way to go so that we can create the right incentives so that if there's a sustained growth in storage, storage is a key element, quite key for energy transition. And so, for example, at night where there's no solar power, storage, that's the main agent so that we can inject energy for users all across Latin America. And so, from that perspective, what I would propose is that we generate a long-term projection, something strategic, where the region can generate knowledge, experience, and transference of knowledge. Because we're all, doing the same. We want to get a zero emissions plan by 2050, and for that, we need a regulation framework that is robust, that will generate the right incentives for the entire region.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Felipe, vamos con Joan.
Thank you, Felipe.
De las cifras
And now let's go with Joan. And out of the figures that Marcos shared, there's a concern because there are some challenges that we need to overcome when we talk about the incentives for development and for technologies, for storage technologies. But when we start looking at a development level that is so accelerated, we could see new challenges along the way. So how do you see these new challenges when facing new conditions? Thank you, Bernardo, for the question. Well, the revolution brings a lot of opportunities, and we see the deployment of a more storage system, and especially battery in Chile. I will not repeat. What Marcos said. 1,700 megawatts, 7,500 under construction. But these are the projects that come after the environmental evaluation. And so this is more shocking. And this is for batteries on over 10 gigawatts. And going back to the incentives, in terms of regulation, we see how this is enabling the process for permits for batteries. So in the short term, these projects will probably be in Marcos' desk seeking the approval for construction. So it's never before seen scale because, it's said that Chile is the country that when it comes to the speed of battery implementation, it's the #1 in the world. And so the challenge are the high incorporation of renewable energy. So there is the pouring and now the complete industries, and we can start using storage. And that, of course, has to do with the implementation of electric transmission. Chile's move energy from north to south, up to north as we wish. This line will be ready in the next decade, but storage will continue being the short-term solution. And, it brings big challenges. And, of course, the relevant institution for touching on the first challenge, we have the electric coordinators. So we see how we incorporate new technologies and how we operate it, and there's new challenges. And we see how batteries can be dispatched and how they can be remunerated. That is not easy. And, as Marcos said, we work as an industry coordinating operations, and that will be very soon. So we hope that will be able to solve the rules on how we're going to dispatch batteries. So let's remember that batteries, consider dispatch of this to happen at peak hours. So the remuneration and financing will assume that, but we want for that to be regulated in a way that this is feasible, and I think Chile will have a robust solution for the long term, as Marco was saying, for the short term, as Marco was saying, and beyond attributes and the remuneration by energy, power, which I agree with Marcos, that's what triggered this battery explosion. And we need to consider complementary services as well. We need to define in a better way the rules under the rules that ERA can participate in, and that will be essential. And as an industry, we're trying to define what are the rules for the recognition of the complementary services for batteries, but looking at the long term, and referencing Chile, and it's a discussion we've had with Marcos, with the minister. We need to think how the composition, going back to the Minister Graf, and looking at the technology issues, how this is changing. And we have a current regulation in a marginless system based on audited costs that was created a long time ago, thinking about new technologies, thermal, hydro, and this new system that we're looking at is completely different. We have more renewable energy, more batteries, and soon other storage, and in the mid-long term planning, we'll have to have that discussion now, and we'll have to have an offer market, and that is a huge challenge for Chile and for other countries. So if we see that now with this revolution, that is one of the biggest challenges in the long term, which is something we need to face as an industry, and we need to look at other countries in the region which will also face these technological challenges. Excellent, thank you. And well, speaking about other countries in the region, how they can simulate the learning in the Chilean process, and from the standpoint of and so looking at the Dominican Republic, there's another element that defines the action of every stakeholder, and we need to face the climate conditions that are presented where, safety and the resiliency of energy systems, they use a number of priorities, number one priority. So how do you see storage? How will that contribute, and what's needed to reinforce this safety policy, and how we can face the climate phenomena that are more frequent than at first?
Okay, so regarding this issue in the Dominican Republic, as it's an island and it's one of the countries with the highest exposure to the catastrophic climatic events, and we are not an interconnected country. We do depend, and we don't produce fuel, so we depend on importation, and one of the main issue points for us is the batteries that contribute significantly to us because they can support our whole electric system, and as we can have this matrix that can be more diversified with the more renewable sources. And it's also going to help us reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, not only because of the price, but because of the geopolitical situation as well. And when we can receive that supply of the fuel, so these renewable that need storage so they can remain in the system, and it provides the stability to our system. And the systems that are there, they can also help with the blackout and power cut-offs, which is very common in the Dominican Republic because we have the production and the supply issues. We have quite a lot of blackouts. We are the country that it's quite normalized, so that people in case of the emergency have optional alternative electricity supply. So for us, this function with the battery batteries can be much more complemented. And it's also that more important case is that we also have the output of the plants. We have this supply and demand issue. So from one plant, if we have some issue with the plant, we can use these systems that can complement our supply, and our auxiliary batteries can also help us to help the system with this movement of the output of the plants. So no doubt that this is going to be a great support that is going to help us once we have it regulated and integrated, and also in growing demand in our demand. Excellent. And I think that the allusion to the regulation needs, we have different roles in the storage, complementary services. They become an avoidable task for the regulator. But John mentioned something, I'm not sure I understood it well, that we are talking about the need of the change of the market model, because it's a market that was designed for the typical systems that are required. So we had hydro, thermal, that had a variability of the cost, and now we are seeing the renewable industry that is a fixed cost industry. So it creates a regulatory issue that is not very simple, right? So how do you see these challenges, how the regulating bodies are going to face this in the future? So first I'm going to start from the last, the market model. I think that in Chile at least we have a lot of public-private actors that have this historical model of the declared cost and that is correctly audited. It's not going to be adequate for this new stage, this third stage, because in the past we were this worked really well with hydrothermic area, but everything that is zero cost is difficult to dispatch, and it's difficult to see the reality. So the coordinator, electric coordinator, and from the technical point of view, they need these studies, and the Energy Commission has already done 2 studies about the migration of the market. So we are expecting to receive a formal response, regulatory response, formal response that is going to tell us how we are going to change these schematics. And from the political point of view, we don't have a consensus because there is an opportunity, and we also need to use more technical point of view and changes of the governmental administration. Like in Chile, we are about to have a new presidential election. So all those changes take their time, over a year, the discussion, and then the implementation is even longer. So at least the bodies that are working on this, we are working and putting this information out there, and we are hoping to get a good response to this. But without these, leaving aside these issues regarding the regulatory changes, the Energy Commission needs to implement all these elements that are becoming active, and we have to consider these technical changes and all these chapters, the variable cost, etc. All those technical references have to be incorporated in a storage regarding considering that the regulations have to be implemented in this, and we need to implement and change regulation 68, which in Chile it's the regulations below 9 megawatt, so they are installed there at the level of transmission. But on top of that, we also have to consider, when we're looking at the bright side, we continue making progress in storage, and it's going to be better for everyone. But we have to be very careful because there are lots of technical aspects, because any system with this high renewable elements such as wind energy and storage, they stop you having these technical characteristics with these synchronic machines. So if we are removing voluntarily these carbon footprint machines, we have a system, we are left with a system that does not have a response rate, adequate response rate when facing some issues, and that is a problem. This is a dark side of the renewables and the storage. We have to make sure that we're facing that, because we cannot say, oh, but this system could fall or have a blackout. For example, in February this year, we had this huge blackout, so we have to consider those elements that we call, in English they're called inverters, in Spanish they are converters, but we have to invest in our electric system, and we're working on that together with the Energy Commission. We should be providing the technical norm changes that will allow us to decide really well the systems, the circuit, to have a very robust system. My electric system colleagues are really hallucinating with these elements, but we have to have metrics to measure this, and they have to be robust and strong systems that are going to help us. That, for example, in the north and south, we have a weakness in these systems. So we have these elements that we have with these inverters, and after all this, when we have to work also on complementary services where we can get these attributes and demand or incentivate for the market to be able to supply at a reasonable cost. But all of that has a certain cost, because in the past we had a synchronic system that would in real time provide this. So now we have to adjust to that. Thank you very much, Marco. That's a very interesting issue, because there is a worry that we cannot ignore regarding the consequences that these systems could have when facing the progressive removal of the thermic generation of electricity, and how can we maintain the stability that we get from these machines. But there are technological responses to this, and we were recently talking about reforming some of these attributes to the systems with batteries. And what is your opinion, Felipe? How can the technological development help to the system operators to maintain the stability of the system, which is essential to provide the supply and to break this myth that we have about the progressive elimination of the thermical machines? Even some of the events that one of the virtual synchronic machine, I don't know if that's the correct term, but could you tell us more about that? Yes, of course. In general, the systems have been dominated by synchronic machines that have been the main strength of the teams that provide the strength to the systems. So all the network codes were based on that. So nowadays we have an important progress. Okay, so those are the batteries, especially with the inverter, as Marco corrected me. The grid-forming inverter is it's a inverter that forms the network. What does it mean? That synchronic virtual machine is the way of operating. So I'm going to model it through the controls so that I can emulate the behavior of the synchronic machines. But there are substantial differences with the synchronic generators. For example, the issue of the inertia, because synchronic generators are rotating machines, so any kind of imbalance of the generation, synchronic generator, they immediately act because they are coupled, while inverters need to sense the signal in the network, and then when I measure that, then I'm going to act. So grid-forming has a very quick response that could be very similar to synchronic generator response, but with the substations, electric substations that are necessary to operate all that. If we want to make progress in 2050, we will require new technology. They are the former of the grid, so this is going to change. So the oscillations in the system are not going to be dominated by the synchronic, they're going to be dominated by generators, so we have to make adjustments. If we are talking about the blackout, what would have happened if we had a grid-forming element? The grid-forming, in general, inject the robust point, the strength into the system, so the solar plants that are at this moment operating, they're operating grid-forming, which means they follow the grid, while grid-forming imposes the grid. So it's very important to combine those two, which is going to provide safety not just for the system, but for the plants as well, and it's going to provide us better incentive, but we still need regulatory framework that is going to tell us what are the incentives. So if I have a grid-forming battery and it's not doing anything, so I have to have the reserve, but this reserve of the energy, so while the synchronic always have the energy while they're moving, so that's slightly different, but it's important to make progress in that, not just on a technical level, but the grid forming is also part within the regulatory framework to see how it's going to be switched off. Thank you very much, Felipe. We have 2 minutes left, and I want to squeeze the maximum out of them, so I'm going to let every one of you to have final words. But Felipe, what you said, the grid forming technology lets us create, but what not control the system, but what is the cost element for this grid forming element? Well, in grid forming is a converter, so it's a black box. So the battery with this black box are creating a system. So there's not enough regulation. How could I have a business model if I don't have regulation to regulate the system? So that's why it's important to create the political will in all the countries to make sure that they want to make progress and take the risks, because so we are going to continue decreasing and providing this energy. Thank you very much, Felipe. So final message, Lucia. My last message in the region in the Dominican Republic is a country that has a very good growth element that has been highlighted in the region. So we have also political stability, which is also an essential point, and we also have a good energy demand, which is 5 to 6%, which is more or less similar to the other countries where it's 4%. And we have a difference between the demand and the need of supply, which makes us a country that has a great energy potential of growth, and we have a jurisdiction stability as well. So since 2001, 2007, that we've been modernizing and updating our regulation between 2020 and 2024, and in that process, some of the regulations in 2025, we have incorporated many topics that are important for the penetration of renewable energies, and we have incorporated 23 operational projects, and we have the bid for 60 megawatt of the renewable storage. So this installed capacity is also with the permits that are waiting. So we have the stage 1 is 6 megawatt, and after that 200 more. So we have many possibilities to become a country that is very attractive for the investment. So if, one country that's been only tourist country, we now have 25% of our direct investment, foreign investment is in energy. So it's a fact, and we have more investors who would also like to continue down this path. Thank you very much, Johan. I'm going to risk to be told off by the organization, but I want to ask the question regarding the experience of the EDF with the pumping system. What is your opinion about having these alternative systems of the energy storage? I'm going to be very quick because of the limited time. We are looking at the evolution of the batteries in Chile, and we want to make a model that can be replicated in Latin America, and with all the challenges that we discussed, and in all the challenges that we are going to face in the future. But I wouldn't be able to sleep at night if we decarbonize Chile, remove carbon-based plants, and just to do all that so that we depend on solar, wind, and a battery, even if it's grid forming. We have to consider our electric grid with the diversity so that we can provide not only good service and efficient cost, but all the attributes that we need towards security and flexibility. So we have to open that discussion and incorporate other technologies that are going to support us to get all these attributes that we're going to lose when we get these thermal centrals, either coal or gas ones. The hydraulic pumping systems that we have over 5 giga in Europe, and they can provide this support to give a system the flexibility to replace some attributes that we're going to lose when we remove these thermal plants. But again, we run into the discussion, what are these technologies competitive compared with our regulations in a Chilean market? There are some attributes that this technology can provide, but it's not shown in remuneration or in payment of. So part of the market is responding to good regulation and the cooperation with the public and private sector that is quite important, but it doesn't allow us that these energies that need more implementation, because the pumping systems will need 10 years to be operation, and we have systems that do not allow us to pay well these elements. We're talking about these different regulatory and market signals that are going to tell us that we can implement these other technologies that are going to be fundamental to have this robust network. And I think it's a part of my final message. to look for this diversity, technological diversity toward the future. And the last that we in Chile are very proud of, all these changes are 3, 4, 5 years, as Marco says. This might take 8 years, 10 years. So we need to maintain Chile in the energetic sector as a state policy, regardless of who is in charge, that our energy policy continues stable. We have electric system, we have hydrogen. It's also becoming a state policy, and we want to implement that long term to see how we are going to have these robust and flexible and long-term solutions. Thank you very much, Joan. This sounds really interesting because on top of everything is the energy policies that we have politics that are going to go beyond the current political party, and this is what Chile needs to transmit to the whole region. We have to be honest, this region is not very present in Latin America, but in the end, everything goes toward the regulation. So I think that we're going to finish this panel with the regulatory agency's message. As my colleague said, there are many things that in the end up with regulation, with the agents, especially when we have innovation, when we're talking about grid forming, which we are implementing into our technical regulation that should be present by the end of the year. The same storage in the battery, they are all technological solutions and revolution. And when some innovation is so technological, the people and everybody who is promoting it, they say, what is going to happen with the regulation? Because regulation is taking too long. The regulator, the state is not up to the task. And there is certain critical element. And I'm not talking just about Chile. I'm talking about the world where we say the regulator is very slow. It's not that the regulators are slow or fast. They have to be opportune. It has to regulate in the correct time. It's not just to regulate for a certain person who has certain idea or a business and what they want. And they want these regulations for these joint systems. It's for we need to balance well the innovation, the private drive in some of them with the risks that this could create for everyone, because poorly done regulation can have catastrophic results, not just for one person, but for everyone. That's why all over the world, I speak to many of my colleagues, we have to be very cautious. We have to do it slowly, but we do it in the end. We have a really good relation in Chile about cooperation with the private and public sector. It might take some time that the relation gets done, but when it's done, and it does get done, then it's very robust, and we consider all the interests that are present. And in Chilean market, they are very diverse and sometimes opposing. But after all that process and the discussion, what we get is relatively robust, and that's something that we have to consider. It might take some time, but then it's going to be permanent in time and something that adapts well to the times. So that will be my final message. Thank you very much, Marco. Thank you very much, Aaron. I think that our panelists deserve a round of applause because their participation was brilliant, and thank you very much for your participation. We have finished this panel. Thank you very much. Before you leave, please, let's take a group photo of the panel.
Gracias, los invitamos al
Thank you
receso
very
y nos
much.
vemos
Now